Suppose you and your friends are stuck in a world where play and reality no longer have clear boundaries. Imagine that your past, filled with childhood fantasies, suddenly becomes a death trap, and innocent roles become tools of manipulation. What if the only way to survive is to accept the rules of a game in which you no longer know who is your friend and who is your enemy? This is a story about three friends, each driven by their own fears and desires. Petula and Tilda are on the brink of despair, running away from debt and stalkers, looking for a chance to start their lives anew. They decide to return to Daphne, a childhood friend who lives in an isolated house filled with ghosts of the past. Daphne, stuck in her fantasy reality, suggests they play a child's game. At first glance, everything seems simple. They must obey the rules that were invented when they were children. However, with each step, it becomes clear that this game is more than just fun. It reveals the darker sides of their friendship and forces them to face their own demons. Where does the game end and reality begin? And can you get out of it without losing yourself? The protagonists are Petula, Tilda, and Daphne, childhood friends whose paths have diverged, but whose lives have become intertwined again due to fateful circumstances. Petula and Tilda, desperate for money, decide to visit Daphne, who lives in a luxurious but isolated mansion. Each is driven by different motives that gradually bring them to an emotional and physical collision. Petula is pragmatic and goal-oriented, and acts as the leader in the duo with Tilda. Her life is a struggle for survival in a cruel world where every mistake can be fatal. Petula acts with cold calculation. She sees Daphne as a chance to get out of debt and make a fresh start. Her motives are crystal clear. She is ready to play by any rules if it will bring her closer to her goal. But her outward confidence hides a deep-seated fear of failure. Petula realizes that the stakes are high and every mistake could cost her everything. It is her determination that leads them to Daphne's house, but her willingness to go to extremes begins to create cracks in the relationship. Tilda, on the other hand, is more impulsive and dependent. She is not used to making decisions on her own and often follows Petula, feeling secure under her influence. Internal contradictions tear her apart. She is afraid of the upcoming game, but she cannot refuse the opportunity to change her life. Tilda is less cold-blooded and more vulnerable, her emotions often taking over, making her the weak link in their alliance. She reaches out to Petula as a support, but this dependence makes her especially vulnerable in a world where friendship becomes a weapon. Her inner fear and desire to be accepted push her into dangerous steps from which she is not always able to escape on her own. Daphne, in contrast, lives in her own world, stuck in her childhood fantasies. Her home is her fortress, and the game she offers her friends is the only way to keep them close. Her motives seem innocent, but with each passing minute, it becomes clear that she's willing to go to great lengths to maintain control of her reality. Their clash is more than just a reunion of old friends. It's a battle of desires, fears, and ulterior motives, where no one can be sure which side they're on. Their friendship turns into a battlefield, and old roles become a trap from which not everyone will be able to escape. Daphne's home is not just a place where events unfold, it is a whole world that reflects her inner isolation and her consciousness stuck in the past. Set away from the hustle and bustle of the city, the mansion looks grand, but from the first moments inside, there is something subtly unsettling. The floors creak, antique toys and dolls stand on shelves like mute witnesses to events. The whole house seems to be stuck in time, preserving traces of a childhood that Daphne has never been able to let go of. It becomes not only a physical space, but also a symbol of her mental state, simultaneously beautiful and frightening. In this house, Petula and Tilda quickly feel their vulnerability. It appears safe on the outside, but inside lurks something much darker. Each room is a reminder of a past that was shared by them all, but now seems alien. This environment heightens the tension between the girlfriends, gradually turning their interactions into a dangerous game. The atmosphere of the house is overwhelming, and over time the space begins to seem to change, reacting to the fears and emotions of the heroines. School supplies, children's drawings, and old photographs serve as reminders that time has stopped here. The house becomes a character, an invisible participant in their psychological struggle, imprisoning them in a world from which escape is harder than it seems. For Daphne, it is her fortress. For Petula, it is a field for manipulation. And for Tilda, it is the place where her fears begin to materialize. Every detail of the house intensifies their conflicts and turns their memories into weapons. The main conflict begins when Petula and Tilda, expecting to take advantage of Daphne's weakness, are confronted with her unexpected strength. They intend to take control, but Daphne refuses to be a mere pawn in their game. She changes the rules, setting her own terms that make the situation increasingly confusing and dangerous. What started out as manipulation turns into a complex psychological game where no one can be sure who really controls what is going on. Gradually, contradictions grow between the heroines. Petula tries to maintain a semblance of control, but begins to lose confidence when Daphne takes her out of her comfort zone. Tilda, on the other hand, becomes more and more emotionally immersed, teetering on the edge of fear and submission. For her, the game becomes a real test where her inner weaknesses come out. The conflict escalates when their actions begin to have real consequences. Daphne's fantasies become more and more violent, and the heroines realize that there will be no easy way out of this situation. The friend they once knew turns out to be far more dangerous than they could have imagined. Every decision they make only heightens the tension, blurring the lines between friendship, betrayal, and survival. The heroines find themselves trapped not only inside the house, but also inside their own fears, memories, and contradictions. They begin to realize that the game has been stretched too far, and now each of them must choose: obey the rules created by Daphne, or try to escape from this illusion at any cost. The climax comes when the rules of Daphne's game go out of bounds and become deadly. And Petula and Tilda, realizing that they are losing control of the situation, try to find a way out of the house, but their disunity only makes things worse. Daphne, completely immersed in her fantasy, no longer sees the difference between play and reality. She becomes the true master of the situation, and her friends become prisoners of both her home and her mind. The turning point comes when Petula decides to take matters into her own hands. She attempts to outsmart Daphne by using her own rules against her. However, this move has unintended consequences. Daphne, feeling threatened by her world, reacts with unexpected ferocity, and the situation spirals out of control. The game turns into a fight for survival, where the stakes become truly high. Tilda, on the verge of a nervous breakdown, becomes the weak link in this confrontation. Her fears and doubts drive her to impulsive actions that jeopardize their chances of salvation. Petula, on the other hand, realizes that the only way to survive is to break the cycle and go beyond the rules created by Daphne. The consequences of Daphne's game become disastrous for all the participants. The house that initially seemed to be a safe haven for Petula and Tilda turns into a real prison from which it is impossible to escape. In the end, none of the friends remain the same. Petula and Tilda realize that their decision to take advantage of Daphne's vulnerability was their fatal mistake. The game they were trying to manipulate spiraled out of control, destroying what was left of their friendship. Petula, whose pragmatism and self-confidence used to help her cope with adversity, finds herself having to fight not only for her life, but also to keep her sanity. Her calculation and ability to adapt to situations become her only salvation, but the price she pays for it proves to be too high. She realizes that every step she has taken in this house has only drawn her deeper into a trap from which it is impossible to escape without serious sacrifice. Tilda, more emotional and vulnerable, becomes the main object of Daphne's manipulations. Her inner conflicts and fears are fully revealed, rendering her almost incapable of resistance. She slowly loses herself, falling under the influence of Daphne and her fantasy world. Tilda becomes a reflection of what happens when one loses touch with reality. Her weakness becomes not only her own tragedy, but also a threat to Petula, who has to decide whether she can continue to fight for both of them or save only herself. Daphne, on the other hand, is triumphant in her own eyes. Her world, albeit illusory, remains unshaken. Her control over the situation proves that she is capable of creating a reality where she is the sole mistress. But her triumph turns out to be a Pyrrhic victory. Daphne loses not only her connection to the real world, but also her friends, whom she wanted to keep at all costs. The game ends, but its traces remain forever. Petula and Tilda, if they survive, can never return to their former lives. They become prisoners of their memories, like Daphne, trapped in her home and in her mind. A conflict that began as a struggle for survival turns into a tragic parable about the destruction of friendship and how far people can go to preserve their illusions. It is a story about how even the closest of bonds cannot withstand the pressures of fears, lies, and lust for control. What would you do if you were in the center of such a game? Would you be able to follow its rules, realizing that each of them could cost you not only your freedom, but also your life? Imagine that your friend, someone you have known for years, suddenly becomes not only a threat to you, but also the person on whom your survival depends. How would you act? Would you try to fight for control? Or would you submit to finding a weakness in this system? How would you deal with feelings of isolation and fear when everything around you reminds you of a past you wish you could forget? Would you be able to keep your sanity if your world began to crumble under the pressure of other people's fantasies? And if you realized that there was no going back to your old life, how far would you be willing to go just to survive? And most importantly, where does the line between friendship and survival fall for you? What are you willing to sacrifice to save yourself? And would you be able to move on with your life knowing that your decisions have destroyed what you once thought was intimacy? The questions this story leaves you with have no clear answers, because every game has its own rules, but it's up to us to see if we can get out of it with our humanity intact.